Welcome to this explainer. Right now, there's a fascinating architectural battle happening inside engineering teams literally all over the world. Express versus NestJS. We're going to unpack exactly what happens when modern backends scale, and more importantly, why they really break down. It's a distinction that completely changes how you should be thinking about your entire tech stack.
Okay, let's dive right into a crucial question that every technical leader eventually has to face, usually at, 2 a.m. when pagerduty goes off. Why do most Node.js backends actually fail? When an application starts crashing or development just grinds to an agonizing halt, what is the true root cause hiding beneath the surface?
Well, the answer might actually surprise you. They fail because the architecture collapses. It's almost never about the traffic or raw requests per second. I mean, sure, performance matters, but the real silent killer? It's that the underlying architecture completely buckles under the weight of the organization building it.
Picture the classic scale-up journey. On day one, you've got a fast-moving startup with 5 engineers and a single Express API. Everything moves super fast. Features ship daily. Speed matters way more than structure, and tech debt, well, that's just a problem for future you. But then, as you grow to 50 engineers in year 2 and then 100 engineers by year 4, the whole landscape fundamentally changes. Microservices pop up. Kubernetes enters the chat. Suddenly, your backend complexity is just off the charts.
And under that immense weight, onboarding a new hire suddenly takes weeks instead of days. Every single service starts looking completely different from the next. Your observability is totally fragmented, and honestly, refactoring feels incredibly dangerous. At this critical juncture, leadership is inevitably staring down one specific tough question. Should we continue scaling with Express, or do we bite the bullet and rebuild around NestJS?
To truly understand this debate, we really have to look at how these frameworks optimize for completely different realities. Express is minimal and fast. It optimizes for pure flexibility and just kind of getting out of your way. NestJS, on the other hand, is heavily structured and opinionated. It optimizes for organizational predictability. And let me tell you, those trade-offs become extremely visible the absolute second your engineering team is put under pressure.
So let's break down Express first. It gives you a lightweight middleware architecture with almost zero abstraction. It's kind of like the Wild West, but in the best way possible. Routing is super simple, and request handling is incredibly direct. You get an incoming request, it hits a middleware chain, a route handler, and boom, a response. Because it stays out of your way and adds virtually no runtime abstraction, the overhead is remarkably small. This is fantastic for rapid experimentation and high-performance edge services where every single millisecond really counts.
But here's the crucial catch. Express does not enforce any structural discipline whatsoever. That flexibility, it's a massive double-edged sword. Since the framework doesn't explicitly tell you how to build your application, every single team just invents their own patterns. Team A uses rigid controllers, Team B goes all in on functional handlers, and Team C, well, they decide to mix massive database queries directly into their routing layer, just to keep everyone on their toes.
Now at 5 engineers, this lack of discipline and high flexibility feels completely harmless. It might even feel like a superpower that lets you ship way faster than your competitors. But at 100 engineers, oh boy, it morphs into pure operational debt. The organization starts spending way more time in endless meetings trying to coordinate architecture and untangling spaghetti code than actually building new features for users.
And this is exactly where NestJS enters the picture. It positions itself as the strict, enterprise-grade parent of the Node ecosystem. Instead of asking dozens of separate teams to repeatedly reinvent how a backend should be structured from scratch, NestJS heavily standardizes that architecture right out of the box. It provides those strict guardrails that rapidly growing teams desperately need.
NestJS is relentlessly opinionated by design. It forces a highly structured architecture built heavily around TypeScript decorators, dependency injection, and providers. It uses specific modules to enforce consistent boundaries across your entire backend. Controllers handle incoming requests, services contain your core business logic, and modules encapsulate features neatly. Basically, the framework absolutely demands consistency, whether you like it or not.
So here's the explicit trade-off you're making. Because NestJS is so incredibly predictable, a new engineer can navigate the codebase and understand the structure on day one. That drastically reduces your onboarding friction. But the invisible tax you pay for that convenience is runtime overhead. You're adding abstraction layers everywhere, heavy dependency injection containers, complex reflection metadata, and constant decorator parsing during runtime.
Which leads us to a massive misconception in the industry that we really need to clear up right now. There's this deeply ingrained false idea floating around that NestJS magically scales servers and raw throughput better than Express simply because it has enterprise stamped on the box. It doesn't. It fundamentally cannot change underlying VA performance characteristics or magically bypass event loop limitations.
In fact, if you look at raw performance, lightweight Express often outperforms NestJS. When it comes to cooled starts, which by the way is absolutely critical if you're running serverless environments like AWS Lambda, Express is fast, while NestJS is notably slower. Why? Because Express completely lacks the heavy decorator metadata and dependency injection bootstrapping during runtime that NestJS requires, and every millisecond spent loading those modules directly impacts your user latency.
On the flip side, though, the assumption that Express can't handle massive enterprise systems is just historically false. Massive global platforms process billions of requests on Express simply by replacing framework opinionation with a rigorous, uncompromising internal engineering discipline. They build their own exceptionally strong architectural standards, code review processes, and linting rules right on top of the minimal framework.
Because the hard truth is this: framework choice alone rarely fixes architectural incompetence. Over-engineering destroys scalability just as easily as under-engineering does. A poorly designed NestJS setup can very easily become a tangled, distributed monolith filled with tight coupling and massive dependency nightmares. Piling on more architecture doesn't automatically mean you're building better architecture.
This perfectly brings us to Conway's law. If you aren't familiar with it, it states that software systems inevitably mirror the communication structures of the organizations building them. It's a fascinating concept, revealing that backend scalability isn't just about the code you write. It's actually a reflection of your team's internal communication. If your engineering teams don't talk to each other and share context, well, your microservices won't effectively communicate either. Let's look at the real cost of chaotic teams. If your organization has messy communication and weak interpersonal boundaries, you're going to suffer from fragmented service ownership, wildly inconsistent APIs, and constant architectural drift across your teams. Your microservices will inevitably become tightly coupled and brittle. Bad service boundaries break both frameworks equally. Literally, neither Express nor NestJS can save you from a disorganized team.
So how do we actually enforce that much-needed consistency? Well, NestJS enforces consistency structurally through its strict modular system and dependency injection. Express, however, requires your senior engineers to constantly police and enforce consistency culturally. In a monorepo with dozens of teams, structural consistency is built in with NestJS. But with Express, as any tech lead knows, scaling code is relatively easy, scaling human culture is incredibly difficult.
So, if we distill this entire debate down to one core truth, it's this: Express scales systems efficiently, NestJS scales organizations efficiently. Runtime scalability and organizational scalability are completely different problems, and these frameworks fundamentally target completely different sides of that coin. Understanding this completely changes how you should evaluate your entire backend strategy. So when should you actually choose Express? Choose it when you have an elite, highly disciplined team with a rock-solid engineering culture. Choose it for serverless edge APIs where every millisecond of cold start time costs you real money. It's a brilliant choice when performance simplicity matters most and you explicitly need maximum, unhindered flexibility to build out custom solutions. On the other hand, choose NestJS when you're managing 15 different teams across 3 different time zones. Choose it when organizational predictability and the rapid onboarding of new engineers are vastly more important to your bottom line than raw compute speed. If you're managing large distributed systems and need to significantly reduce operational complexity, NestJS provides the critical guardrails your organization needs to scale safely. At the end of the day, throwing more servers at a raw traffic problem is cheap, but fixing a tangled, massive organizational mess, that is profoundly expensive. Architectural discipline will always trump framework branding. Whether you prefer the lean minimalism of Express or the strict enterprise guardrails of NestJS, poor observability and weak internal boundaries will inevitably destroy your system either way. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to ponder. Knowing the massive shift required from technical scaling to organizational scaling, if your backend team magically grew from 5 to 100 engineers tomorrow, would you still choose Express?